Let's talk some recruiting. Notre Dame just picked up a big-time wide receiver prospect in the class of 2025. Plus, is Deuce Knight going to return to campus here in a couple weeks? All that more on today's edition of Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome into Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. My name is Tyler Wojciak and I'm the host. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018 and now I'm a producer at Fox Sports. It's great to have you here on Wednesday, October 2nd. And thanks for making this your first listen of the day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. Plus, you can watch full thing on YouTube as well. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you are watching on YouTube, or if you're listening to the podcast, please rate the show 5 stars, maybe even leave a review and subscribe there as well. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Even though it's the bye week, we still got you covered here, and today we got a bunch of great recruiting coverage coming your way. I have not dedicated a full episode to football recruiting since mid-August, I believe, because I've been so focused on the season. Plus, it had actually been pretty quiet lately on the recruiting front. But then on Tuesday, Notre Dame picked up a big commitment from wide receiver Antavius Richardson in the class of 2025. And it happened at a perfect time because I was already planning on catching up with recruiting insider Eric Thomas for today's show. So today we are going to break down Richardson's commitment, what it means for the Irish, the latest on Deuce Knight, and linebacker Madden Faraimo coming off his official visit this past weekend. Then we're going to get into the biggest risers and fallers in the class of 2025 before we look ahead to the class of 2026. Without further ado, here's Eric. All right, I'm joined now by Eric Thomas from Irish Illustrated, and it has been a minute since we did a deep dive into the recruiting trail, so there's a bunch of different stuff I want to get to, but let's start with the big news from Tuesday. Notre Dame landed a commitment, a surprise commitment, it sounds like, from 3-star wide receiver Antavius Richardson out of Georgia. Richardson had been committed to USF, then Notre Dame, Alabama, and some other big-time schools started coming after him, and now he's Irish. So just take us through the timeline of this recruitment.
Yeah, he was one of the guys who was initially announced as an offer in that second wave of offers following the misses that were in, I guess it was mostly in July. So it's only been a couple of months here. I can actually pull it up here for the exact date, but he only received his Notre Dame offer, back on August 23rd. So a very short and condensed window here. Notre Dame had an opportunity to get him on campus for an official visit, and it sounds like everything went extremely well in that visit. We heard a lot of confidence coming out of that. There's a lot of alignment with him. He's a 3.9 student, so the academics are really a big appeal for him, and I think that was something that really kind of hit home. It was a little bit of a surprise. He was supposed to be at Alabama for his second visit to Tuscaloosa last Saturday. For the Georgia game. Because of the hurricane, he was unable to make it. But reporting from Alabama team sites on our 247 Sports Network as of this morning indicated that the expectation was that he would return to Tuscaloosa for another visit. So this was really kind of a quick thing. I think ultimately when he didn't have that second touch point with Alabama, it probably made the decision that much easier for him to make, and that, look, I know that this is an alignment of my priorities. It's been, clear to me for a little while now that I'm probably going to leave the USF Bulls. And ultimately, I really think it was that academic component, that culture component, and just how well he sort of got along with the coaches from that visit that pushed it over the top.
How did Richardson become such a fast riser up the recruiting rankings? Because this actually happened before the start of the senior season. It looked like he started to pick up a bunch of momentum over the summer, and now he went from a guy who was committed to USF with some offers from like Alabama, who you mentioned, Louisville was after him, North Carolina, but he ultimately picked Notre Dame.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, he's a really, really dynamic athlete. His 247 profile lists state championships in his junior year for the 100 and 200 meter. His Twitter profile, lists a 400 meter championship. This is a really unique player. I think when you talk about late risers, what causes them to explode is it can also be explained like, why weren't they on the same profile? He plays quarterback. Like he's one of those guys who he's just so transparently like the best player on the team that they just put the ball in his hands every play. He's never actually played wide receiver. He did have defensive back tape, and that's actually where Alabama was evaluating him as a safety option. From what I've gathered, it seems like he was probably a backup option to Ivan Taylor, who they're actively trying to flip, familiar name. So there's a little bit more in the background there that I'm not an Alabama expert. I won't go into, but for Notre Dame, I really think what they saw was this is a great athlete. And right now with where they were at in the wide receiver room, realistically, if they can find someone who has elite level measurables and verified elite level measurables, they feel like they can take the chance on a project like that and have the kind of runway and value add from finding an underserved or an underrated prospect like that. And that's where they can find advantages. So I think it was a little bit of creativity on the staff's part to find a small school kid in Georgia who's just like this crazy athlete. But it also does come from a place of his skill set, his athletic measurables fit in the mold of what Notre Dame is missing from the wide receiver room. The one sort of key missing part that's the projection is the fact that he's never played wide receiver.
Yeah, that's an important part of it, I would say.
Yes.
But
Yes,
this happens where teams recruit a guy who plays quarterback, but he's just such an elite athlete that he can do a bunch of different things. And, you want to get him on campus and figure out if you could take those elite measurables and turn him into a polished wide receiver. So he's clearly a developmental player to me. And with Notre Dame's 2 wide receivers committed in the class, Elijah Burris and Jerome Bettis Jr., I think it begs the question, is Notre Dame done at wide receiver? Because the last time I had you on, I believe it was in August, that was the talk, right? Notre Dame had just whiffed on their top guys in the wide receiver board. They did just have a different wide receiver on campus this weekend, so it doesn't seem like they're done to me. But what's your read on the situation?
Yeah, they're not done trying. Obviously, when it comes to flips, there's kind of a different level of initiative it takes to get those guys to commit because they're already sort of locked into one view of what this is going to look like at the next level for themselves, right? So Notre Dame is currently working with 2 other receiver commits and sort of at the forefront of this conversation. That would be Jalen Cooper out of Steele High School in Texas, and that would be Isaiah Mizell. He's from down in Orlando, Florida. The school's name is escaping me. Mizell just came off his official visit. Impressions from a source close to it, someone who has taken the visit, and I don't want this to seem like it's a staff or, misrepresenting, but it sounds like the visit went better than even he expected. I think there was some folks who, when he showed up, they weren't really sure when they first met him, like the first, person or interactions, like, I don't know if he's super serious or whatever else. And that's probably just like a first meeting impression, whatever. By the end of the weekend, that was not the case to the same source. So this is something where I think Notre Dame really did sort of raise the bar for expectation for themselves. The big question at this point is if he's going to get back to Arizona. He's talked about potentially getting another visit out there. It's not confirmed. I'm still looking to see, checking the sources in Arizona as well. In Arizona and in Florida, where he's from, to see if he's actually going to make that trip. But right now, that's kind of the kicker. He does intend to make his decision before the end of the fall. For Jalen Cooper, I wrote an article a few weeks ago. I think he's the top of the board target left in the 2025 class. I love his game. For people who have followed and know how much I like Elijah Burris, I think Jalen Cooper is a very similar level player in terms of like output. Gets there in a different way, but he might even be like a better version of what Burris is. He's a great player. He's a guy we're probably not going to know much until he gets on campus for FSU. Because he's a commit, he was just at SMU last weekend or 2 weekends ago. It's a little bit touchier to get information out of him. That's something we're still working on. But there's the interest in Notre Dame is real. They are treating him like a top of the board target, and I would expect there to be updates, pretty concrete updates coming out of that FSU visit, especially because it's toward the end of his senior season.
Yeah, if Jalen Cooper were to commit to Notre Dame, he would be the highest ranked wide receiver commit in the class. 24/7 Sports has him as the number 32 ranked receiver overall in this class, top 250 player. He is currently committed to SMU, so that is a developing situation. As for the quarterback in this class, let's talk Deuce Knight. So he's committed to Notre Dame publicly, but based on all the reporting that's out there, he is also committed to Auburn, privately at least. I think we all expect him to end up with Auburn despite all the issues that they have going on down there at the farm. And yet there are some reports that he is scheduled to visit Notre Dame for the Stanford game next Saturday. On my end, I'm kind of just like, look, I don't think he's ever going to come to Notre Dame at this point. Even if he does, the talk about him is always going to be like, is he going to transfer? Is he going to transfer? So why hasn't Notre Dame just decided to move on at this point and start recruiting other quarterbacks in this class?
Yeah, it's weird. It's like it's almost like Notre Dame's opportunity to do that and maximize the value of doing that has passed. At this point, the expectation is still that Knight probably ends up at Auburn. That being said, checking with sources on their side, Auburn has gotten impatient with Deuce Knight as well. For as much consternation as the fans at Notre Dame side feel, Auburn is not loving the fact that they keep hosting this kid. And he doesn't
4 weeks in a row for the record, right? He's been to 4 straight
5
Auburn
visits
games.
since August.
And they've lost every one.
Yes.
Except
really
the season opener. They lost. They won that one, and then they lost the next 3.
Yeah, and I don't know. The Auburn sources indicated, and Tom Loy, I believe, indicated this morning as well, that Auburn has circled back to USC commit Julian Lewis. They mutually parted ways before. There's a little bit of oddity with how that situation played out, and maybe some other influence besides Lewis himself and the school. I would anticipate now that he has the green light to visit Auburn, or to commit to Auburn, they will be heavily competitive for Julian Lewis. He's from Georgia, despite the fact that he's a USC commit. I think if they get him on campus and Deuce Knight does not pledge before Lewis leaves campus, there is a strong chance that he will take Knight's spot. That being said, Auburn's definitely communicating that to Deuce Knight, and no shade against Lewis. He's a great quarterback. I think you'd probably rather have Deuce Knight if you're looking at long-term value. I think they will probably use that to somewhat signal to him that this is on a timer and he needs to move. So there's a little bit of a touch and go element to this. If Notre Dame was going to cut bait with Knight, they likely probably would have gotten the best value out of that a few weeks ago. And the reason I say that is about 2 weeks ago off memory, Oregon offered Cal commit Jackson, I believe it's Q Sagapolatele, quarterback from Hawaii. He's an excellent talent. Also a left-hander, so he looks really cool throwing the ball, but besides the point. He's a great talent. Excellent ability to throw the ball with pinpoint accuracy and velocity. He has a very quick release. He does have a little bit of that 3/4 arm angle release, so it's a little bit odd to watch, but he's a great player. With Oregon getting involved in beating Notre Dame to the theoretical punch, that's going to be more of an uphill battle, even if they already have a quarterback committed, than it would have been previously. So I don't know at this point what the right move is, because if Knight does visit Notre Dame for the Stanford game, as we're hearing has been talked about for a number of weeks, I have not confirmed that that's happened, and I think Notre Dame would love to confirm that as well. If he visits for Stanford, the likelihood that he ends up in the class of Notre Dame is really high. So at this point, do you cut bait? Do you want to take the chance and try and get this on the board? I get the struggle. It's just a tough situation, and Notre Dame will have pivot options. They will have blue chip pivot options that they'll start with. What that process actually looks like and how behind the 8 ball they are with how much Deuce has dragged this on, it's impossible to say, because it is like the cards are in the vest. They're not close to the vest. They're in the vest. They're hidden. And they don't want to talk about it until Knight officially makes his announcement, which makes it so much harder to parse through what a pivot would look like. Because as far as Notre Dame's concerned, until Knight says it himself, there is no pivot.
Yeah, I think that's what everyone is trying to figure out here. Like, what seems to be the holdup? Because when he visits Auburn 4 weeks in a row, he's wearing all the Auburn gear. It looks like he's gone to Auburn, and yet he won't announce it publicly. And there's even been some reports that he's communicating with the Notre Dame commits as if he is still in the class. So it all makes for a very weird situation. I understand that the Notre Dame coaching staff is put in a very difficult spot because they really need a quarterback in this class. And a big reason why is when you look ahead to next year, Notre Dame has been pretty vocal that they do not anticipate entertaining any sort of transfer quarterback as the starter. So it's going to be either one of Steve Angeli, Kenny Minchie, or CJ Carr. Most people, most fans, I should say, assume it's going to be CJ Carr, which on one hand is great. You know, he seems to be the future of the program. However, if you make CJ Carr the starting quarterback next year, there is a high risk that Steve Angeli and Kenny Minchie end up transferring out, which would then leave you with one active scholarship quarterback on the roster unless they are able to get someone in this class of 2025. So how does Deuce Knight's wavering factor into this decision? Because they really need a quarterback in this class if they decide to go with Carr for the future.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, especially the earlier you go with Carr, right? The higher likelihood that a guy like Minchie follows suit. I think if Angeli had, any indication, it wouldn't matter the timing. It's a tough call. And with the options that seem to be sort of the top of the radar, that being Sagapolutele and SMU commit Ty Hawkins, who's the quarterback down at IMG, those pivot points would represent a good enough comparable swing at the plate that I think you're in a good place with like a freshman quarterback, and you still might need to go get a guy in the portal that, hey, he might not be a bona fide star, but most rosters need 4 quarterbacks. Like if you're running with 3, you're running very, very low margin for error. And if that's the situation Notre Dame is projecting for itself, they need to really, really consider the fact that maybe it's worth it to go get someone in the portal. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a threatening signal to CJ Carr if you name him the starter. But once again, timing does matter here if you want to have an outside chance of keeping Kenny Minchie. So there's a lot of sort of delicateness to the timing here. I think if Notre Dame is to get a guy like Sagapolutele or Hawkins, it lowers the urgency to immediately go out and grab a portal quarterback. I think those guys give you a good enough platform for freshman quarterbacks that you can feel comfortable with them and Carr as sort of like your guys for the future. And really at that point, you're playing your odds for how does this play out with the other shuffling. Even at 3, I don't love that situation. If they don't get one of those guys, if they were to go further down the board and get a guy in 2025 or go, miss, you have to go get one of those. You have to get somebody in the portal. There's not enough flexible room for you to weather a season if someone gets hurt if you don't.
It's a really interesting dynamic, and I'm sure that the Notre Dame coaching staff has been thinking about it quite a bit because there are just so many different moving parts. And, a lot of people are just kind of penciling in CJ Carr as the starter next year. There's 2 very talented quarterbacks in front of him. So Who knows what is going to happen there. We're going to be right back with Eric to break down the biggest risers and fallers in Notre Dame's recruiting class of 2025. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about a really cool new feature from our friends at Gametime. So you know that I love going to live events, and Gametime is a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. The great thing about Gametime is the curation makes it easy to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, you name it. And just recently, I decided to go to a show at the legendary Comedy Store in West Hollywood, and I decided at the last minute, but Gametime made it easy to buy my tickets, and I ended up having a great time, all thanks to Gametime. My favorite thing about the app, though, is you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, and then you can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. What time is it? Gametime. This past weekend, though, elite linebacker Madden Faraimo was just on campus to take his visit. He looks like he could be a part of this Notre Dame class in the near future. I know Texas has been in on him, and then USC has been as well. He's from Southern California. But what were your impressions from this visit and his future with Notre Dame?
Yeah, I heard good feedback about the visit, which is always what you want to start with, right? We heard that there was good moments where he connected with Notre Dame alumnus, specifically Maris Leofau. They had a nice moment when he was in the stands. He got to see a longtime friend of his, Kingston Viliamu-Asa, get a sack in the game, which was a great play as well. That's always exciting. And it seems like Notre Dame was really just sort of honing in on the message of like, you belong here. You were close to committing here before, and you know that this is a place that you connect with, your values connect with, that allows you to go after your goals beyond what's on the football field while still fully pursuing your goals on the field. And they really tried to, you can wrap that up, I guess, as like part of the 440 pitch, but they really just tried to connect this to why personally this was a fit for him. And part of that was even like the lineage of Polynesian athletes at Notre Dame and the success that they've had. And it sounds like from the feedback that I've been getting, it resonated. I was on the record saying I fully expected Notre Dame to lock down his recruitment during the course of that visit. I still believe that that's the case. Sources close have said that a decision is sort of imminent. I don't know. With Madden Faraimo, a colleague jokingly said he's an equal opportunity ignorer, which is kind of true. So we never really know what's happening until he says, okay, you can know now. I would expect in the next month or so, we have some clarity on either a commitment or we have the commitment done. That would kind of be my expectation.
Notre Dame is also in the mix for another elite linebacker, Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng, and things have been pretty quiet on that front as of late. There was a moment, I believe in June, coming off their official visits where Notre Dame looked to be the leader for Faraimo and Owusu Boateng, but he did release his top 6 and Notre Dame was firmly in the list of finalists. So where do things stand with that recruitment?
Yeah, it's interesting. Ohio State made that list, and we were told explicitly by sources at Ohio State that he probably was not fit for their last remaining linebacker spot. They were looking for someone to play the jack position, which is more of like a hybrid defensive end who can play outside linebacker and not shuffle personnel. Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng's like 6'1.5", 6'2" on a good day. So he's not that. He's not a D-end. But we'll see exactly how the ones in the back shake out. Texas is an interesting newcomer. I would say Florida's an interesting newcomer, but I don't know how much longer the staff that's recruiting him is going to be employed. So moving aside from them, Texas is one of the hottest recruiting teams in the country. So to see them get added to any list is going to be a concern. Obviously, they're on Faraimo's as well. That being said, the main group that I continue to hear about with him and that continues to be the focal point is Notre Dame, Michigan, and USC. USC's new defensive staff is impressing people. They're not only impressed with what they've seen on the field so far this season, but even in the offseason, I think recruits found a lot of credibility and found a lot of genuine conversation in their time with D'Anton Lynn. And I think they buy it. I think they buy that this is a real change and that he's a guy that will make them better. And it's significantly changed the outlook for Lincoln Riley program and for USC. That being said, I still think the Irish are, from everything I've gathered, the lead here today for Owusu Boateng. I also think that it helps that he was rumored to be on campus for the Louisville game. We were talking about that visit for a little while, and then it changed to he's going to be on campus, I believe, in November. I like that. I like the fact that they moved it. I like the fact that they're trying to get like the last look with him and they're trying to be there. And part of the reason for that is he's a guy who seems to like the recruiting process. And every time he leaves a place, he talks about how significant the visit was and how great it was. And I don't doubt it. Recruiting is a great experience. I bet it was fun. But when you have a guy who might maybe gravitate towards that sparkle instead of substance, at least in the moment, you want to make sure that you're getting the last look to hit him with both. And I like that Notre Dame is taking that approach. I still like the Irish for this one. I think Faraimo's recruitment is probably coming to a more imminent close than Owusu Boateng's, which could directly impact it. Not only because obviously going to the same school and competing for similar snaps or snaps at different spots or what have you, but the competitors are the same. Texas is in the same group, and you're looking at a couple of different points where staffs like Ohio State is technically involved with both. Like those staffs could make a move if, okay, Madden Faraimo goes for Notre Dame, Texas could go all in on Owusu Boateng and shift the landscape. So it'll be interesting to see how the dominoes affect one another.
We're about halfway through the high school football season, believe it or not. Who do you think has been the biggest riser in the class of 2025 for the guys who are committed to Notre Dame?
Yeah, there's a couple guys that jump to mind. Ko Okia is probably the first guy I would say. He is so violent and he is so aggressive as a linebacker from Hawaii. He plays assignment correct, but he looks reckless. And that's like the best compliment I can give him is he plays just so fast and so instinctive, but he doesn't make mistakes. I really appreciate his game, especially for a guy who's maybe not he's built like these hybrid linebackers. He's not the biggest, but much like his brother, man, he's just going to come, he's going to hit you and you're going to remember it. Another guy I really think has shown, especially compared to his ranking, is Elijah Burris. I love Burris' game.
Yeah, you've been high on him since he committed. I remember that. You've been leading that train.
Yeah, I love Elijah Burris' game. He's been an excellent deep threat. This last game, they finally gave him some targets more in like the short yardage, move the chain situations, which he is fully capable of doing, and he delivered on it. And I don't know, there's an explosive element to his game with just how quickly he gets in and out of his breaks. That's unique. You don't see a lot of guys who have that period. We haven't seen a guy like that at Notre Dame and probably since Will Fuller. So there's a quickness there that I really appreciate. And with Mike Denbrock's offense, the consistent themes you see in the Denbrock offenses when they're at their best is they're guided by receivers who maybe aren't the most like physically outstanding. Like they're not 6'4" and like jumping over guys. They get open. They just can create separation vertically, laterally at all areas of the field, and they don't have to be schemed open. They can feel space and find it. that is Elijah Burris, and he's like a direct fit for like what you want a wide receiver skill set to look like in this offense.
Whose stock has fallen a bit, if at all, during the 2024 season?
Yeah, stock falling is always tough, but one guy, he's injured. Gordy Solstead tore his ACL before the season. He's a guy who, he's a 3-star, he's developmental. We were hoping for a big senior season. He's definitely someone that I think, you were hoping for that development. I don't know if his stock has necessarily fallen, but his has stagnated and other people's is going up, and that's more the root of the issue. Another guy I would probably mention just from the early looks here is probably Daniel Anderson. He's a guy that he has not been the number one back in that rotation pretty much all season. In the last game, he had 2 carries. They went for 70 yards and 2 touchdowns, but he had 2 carries. And he doesn't command a share of that backfield responsibility in the way that a guy coming to Notre Dame should.
Yeah, that commitment did not really make a ton of sense to me because, I understand that like sometimes you can find some diamonds in the rough, and Notre Dame has 2 running back commits in this class. They also have Justin Thurman, but like Notre Dame had Aeneas Williams and Kedron Young locked up so early that I thought they were going to go after some really big fish, swing for some 5-star running backs, and instead they went with Anderson and Thurman. So it'll be interesting to see how that running back position shakes out here. But I just got a few more questions left here. With Richardson in the fold, Notre Dame has 23 total commitments in this class right now. We do expect at least one, Deuce Knight, to drop out at some point, but Notre Dame could then, immediately fill that spot with Madden Faraimo. Ultimately, how many players do you think are going to end up in this class of 2025?
It's a good question. Yesterday, I probably would have thought that 1 wide receiver was likely. From where I'm sitting today, I think they'll probably have 2. And that's not like a name for either one. One of the 2 they'll probably flip.
Cooper or Mizell.
Yeah, exactly. And this one's a little bit odd. Tight end Tiandre Waverly from Kamiak, Washington. He took an official visit to Notre Dame. I spoke with him following the visit, and he mentioned that he didn't have an offer yet because he was waiting for some stuff in the background with admissions and just sort of like operationally to get cleared up. And when I spoke with him about a week ago, he said that was probably going to be cleared up in 1 to 2 days, and there has been no announced offer. So I don't know if there's still work to do or what's going on there. I don't want to speculate about, kids' grades or whatever, but whatever the holdup is, if he gets the offer and it's committable and he's admitted, I have a very hard time seeing him elsewhere but Notre Dame. But I don't know the exact details of why that hasn't happened yet. Beyond that, on the quarterback side of the ball, like I mentioned, there's a couple targets for replacement. If they do decide to go after a running back, for whatever reason here, I don't know if they need one. There's good options in 26, but this is just kind of a plug for a guy I like. Nolan James, DePaul Catholic running back. He's teammates with Elijah Burris. That guy rocks. He is super, super explosive. For a smaller back, he breaks a ton of tackles, and he's a Boston College commit. You can take guys from backup college if you really want to. Like, this is a kid who fits the profile for what Notre Dame's looking for, and his play style is kind of like a little bit of a sawn-off of Aeneas Williams. He might be a little bit faster straight line speed than Williams, but otherwise I think they're pretty comparable, although Williams is probably head and shoulders above him as a pass blocker. And then on the defensive side of the ball, besides the linebackers, let's say they add one of those guys, just to be conservative, they're going after 2 edge rushers. Specifically, that is Tim Griffin of Alcovy, Georgia, a guy who was unranked, still unranked, but basically had like no offers until 3 weeks ago. And now Alabama, Florida, Cincinnati, a number of others have come into the picture as well as Notre Dame. I think the bigger name to note here for Notre Dame's purposes is Jalen Wiggins. He's a Florida commit. He's a guy that Notre Dame's been trying to get on campus for like 6 months, and he has not been on campus, but the expectation is that's probably going to change in the next couple of weeks. My understanding is it's likely Cooper or Griffin, but given the expanded scholarship rules and everything else, that could be a misinterpretation. But I think that they're likely to go all in on flipping Jalen Wiggins. And if that doesn't happen, Griffin's the likely pivot point. The Tide are also involved in that one. They were his first Power 5 offer. He's going to give them consideration, and they will get an official visit as well as the Fighting Irish. So,
yeah, I wonder how many coaches out there are just looking at everybody who's committed to Florida right now, just waiting to pounce and just hoping that Billy Napier gets let go sooner rather than later so that the Sharks can eat on that class. But that will be something interesting to follow because Wiggins is a really big-time player, top 100 prospect nationally. So if Notre Dame were to come in there late and swoop in, that would be a big-time get. All right, last question here. Looking ahead to the class of 2026, we know that Notre Dame loves to get guys committed early, but right now they only have 2 commitments in that class, quarterback Noah Grubbs and Jordan Faison's little brother, Dylan Faison. Who are some names to keep an eye out for that could be on commit watch here soon? Because it seems like Notre Dame gets them in bunches.
Yeah, I think the most obvious name here is Sullivan Garvin, offensive lineman who visited last week. There were a couple crystal balls thrown in for him. I don't usually touch crystal balls. It's just not my thing, but you can effectively consider one thrown in for me as well here. I think Garvin's going to end up at Notre Dame. Another guy who's interesting, I don't know exactly what the details are in the background here, and I'll explain, is Gregory Patrick, another lineman from Michigan. He's a guy who, when I talked to him the first time, probably 2-3 months ago, he mentioned specifically, like, oh, I love Notre Dame, even though I'm from Michigan. Like, my dad's a Michigan State alum. I really connect with Notre Dame. It's a place I feel comfortable at. It feels like home to me. He talks about how his commitment timeline was bearing in mind that Notre Dame guys commit early. And he mentioned that, it was dependent on what other guys did or whatever else that time. I didn't think too much of it. But he said that again when I spoke to him following his visit earlier this year. I'm wondering if Notre Dame is looking at other options before greenlighting him. I think Patrick's a guy who would belong at Notre Dame either way. If everything is clear there in the background and he has, the full green light for Notre Dame, I think Gregory Patrick will probably end up there. Beyond that, it is a little bit trickier on the 2026 side, just because things do feel a little bit wide open. I don't know what his timeline is, but one guy I would say I expect to be in the class sometime, probably in the earlier part of the cycle, maybe after his junior season. Joey O'Brien, a safety from Pennsylvania, actually out near me. He's an excellent player. He's one of the higher ranked safeties. There's really like 3, highly regarded blue chip safeties that are on the board in 2026. Blaine Bradford, Braylon Womack, and O'Brien. I think O'Brien's the most likely of those 3 to end up at Notre Dame at this point. And then there's also Nick Reddish, who I believe is rated as a 3-star, but he is a 4-star talent. He's also a guy who could end up at Notre Dame. I believe Wisconsin's also very competitive there. But looking at that, I think O'Brien's pretty likely from that side. And then the last one I'll throw out here is he's named Notre Dame his leader in the past. They've continued to impress. I don't know exactly what his timeline for commitment is at this point, but Thomas Davis Jr. feels like a guy you can pretty neatly telegraph to Notre Dame at this point. Neatly telegraph is relative because with recruiting, he gets one phone call, it goes really great. All of a sudden, Notre Dame's in second. But right now, here today, I think Thomas Davis Jr. is probably an exercise in knowing where he's going to go, and we're waiting for the announcement because he wants to do his due diligence.
Be sure to check out all of Eric's work at irishillustrated.com, plus his podcast with Kevin Sinclair, Tracking the Trail. We love the team over there at Irish Illustrated. And Eric, I appreciate you taking the time to join me today, and I'm sure we'll be in touch again soon because we're getting close to signing day, believe it or not. So take care, man.
Absolutely. Appreciate it, man. Always good to talk to you.
Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans, you could start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you can place your bets. And you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And if you're looking for something to bet on with your first $5 bet, we got another pick for you coming your way. Thursday Night Football tomorrow. Buccaneers plus 1.5 against the Falcons. We have had a really great run of picks on the show as of late. The Commanders covered against the Bengals on Monday Night Football. They actually won that game outright. The Giants squeaked by and covered against the Cowboys, and the Bengals covered against the Panthers. Those were all picks that were given out on the show. So let's stay hot here. We're going to go with the Buccaneers plus 1.5. I've been liking the dogs lately, even though I did take the Bengals, who were favored in that one. And I just think that Baker Mayfield and the Bucs are actually going to get a win on the road. I'm not super confident in them winning outright, so we'll just take the 1.5. And for more, just visit FanDuel.com today. Okay, that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. So we talked a lot of football recruiting on today's show, but tomorrow, Notre Dame basketball reporter Tom Noy is going to come on to talk about this insane run that men's basketball coach Micah Shrewsbury is on right now. The Irish picked up 4 commitments in about a week, including 5-star Jalen Harrelson, and they have the top class in the country right now. You heard that right. Notre Dame basketball recruiting is scorching hot. So you're going to want to tune into tomorrow's episode. Then on Friday, we're doing a bi-week mailbag. So get those questions in. As always, you can submit yours in the YouTube comments on X at Locked On Irish or on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. Also, remember, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast, and I'll see you tomorrow.